Come join us now in this video as we celebrate once again the visit of the historic Liberty ship SS Jeremiah O'Brien to Portland, Maine from August 6th to August 14th, 1994. We had a wonderful visit, and now you're going to have an opportunity to share it with us. We want to honor and dedicate this film to the men and women in South Portland, Maine who built 236 Liberty ships during World War II, and also to the men and women who built Liberty ships in the 17 other shipyards during World War II. Honor and dedicate also to the men of the United States Merchant Marine who gallantly served aboard these vessels in hostile waters during the war, and to the men of the United States Navy Armed Guard who stood their watch and protected the vessels under enemy attack. It's all there. Come and share with the 17,000 people who visited our ship while it was in Portland, Maine. Come and enjoy with us.
It's Saturday morning, August 6th. The Jeremiah O'Brien waits patiently off the Portland headlight for its scheduled 8 a.m. arrival. As has been customary during her 12,000-mile voyage, she's ahead of schedule. Finally, accompanied by an armada of well-wishers, the Jeremiah O'Brien heads into Portland Harbor amid the cheers and expectant gazes of hundreds of onlookers. The last time the Jeremiah saw these waters was on July 2nd, 1943, bound for Boston on her maiden voyage, where she was to be loaded with steel and grain for Great Britain. By 1943, America was involved in the greatest industrial challenge the world has ever seen, in support of the Allied war effort. Under the leadership of Admiral Emory Scott Land, chairman of the United States Maritime Commission, 18 shipyards across the country were producing a special breed of merchant vessel called the Liberty ship. These 18 yards included 2 yards located in South Portland, Maine, operated by the New England Shipbuilding Corporation. The Liberty ship was designed to be simple to construct and operate. It brought the concept of mass production to a grand scale. 2 technological firsts attributed to Liberty ship production are large-scale prefabrication and welded as opposed to riveted hulls. These 2 innovations dramatically reduced construction time and made the miracle of the Liberty ship possible. The whole Liberty strategy was to build ships faster than the enemy could sink them, and it worked. By 1943, large convoys, most of Liberty ships, were carrying everything from grain to planes to our allies and to war zones all around the world. The South Portland yards alone employed nearly 30,000 workers, operating 3 shifts a day, 7 days a week. 3,700 workers were women who did everything from welding to crane operating. By the end of the war, these 2 yards alone had built and launched nearly 250 ships. All told, 2,752 ships were built nationwide in a span of only 3 years. They were built to be expendable with a lifespan of possibly 5 years. And here we are today, more than 50 years later, welcoming a returning war hero, the SS Jeremiah O'Brien, as if it were only yesterday that she left the outfitting dock bound for ports unknown.
I was not aware that the Jeremiah O'Brien might return until 1980. And we formed an association called the South Portland Shipyard Society. And we had 3 goals. One was to bring the Liberty ship back. Second was to establish a museum. And third was just to make sure that the history of the building of the Liberty ships would be recorded for all time.
I first stepped foot on this ship in 1962 when she was one of 800 Liberty ships that were going to be scrapped by the U.S. government. And my assignment at that time was to rank these ships from the best to the worst. And we would sell the worst first and keep the best in case an emergency came out. And it was something very special about the Jeremiah O'Brien. It was obvious that the ship was in good condition, had only been used in World War II, had made the Normandy invasion, and she was a ship that was part of our heritage that should not be scrapped. And finally the time came in 1979 when she was the last one. And at that time I had to go out and get a crew together, a volunteer crew, a Merchant Marine crew, a World War II veteran crew. And we did that. And then we formed the National Liberty Ship Memorial. We registered the ship in the National Register of Historic Places, which made her secure, just like the Liberty Bell or the Washington Monument. And then we got the ship steaming in the fleet. First time in history, a ship that laid up for 33 years. Volunteers went down and got the fires going in the boilers, and we activated all the systems, and we steamed the ship out on October 6, 1979 with 500 people on board. We went 45 miles down to the Bethlehem shipyard in San Francisco. And at that time we had gotten a large grant, one-time grant from the National Trust for Historic Preservation of $432,000. And we had to match that with private contributions. And this gave enough money to do a proper job in the shipyard, sandblasting the ship, rigging all the cargo gear, rigging the lifeboats, bringing everything up to standard. And in May the 21st, 1980, President Carter proclaimed that day National Liberty Ship Day in the United States. And we steamed out the Golden Gate with our volunteer crew and our largest U.S. flag flying. And the Jeremiah O'Brien has served since then as a proper memorial, an operating memorial, which was the first time in history this country ever had a ship that operated as a memorial ship. And then in 1987, we decided we would take the ship back to Normandy, since this was the only ship at that time that was operating that had actually been in the Normandy beachhead. And so the day came, finally, 18 April, and we steamed out of the Golden Gate at full speed, and we made England ahead of schedule.
Finally, the O'Brien reaches its first U.S. port of call since leaving the coast of France. Waiting on dock are scores of former shipyard workers, merchant mariners, and naval armed guard personnel, eager to share memories and renew old friendships.
Okay. Go on! That's my husband. That's Bill Duncan, third engineer. Right there on the middle deck.
But thank
waving.
You. Thank you.
Land ahoy!
I'm from the harm.
God bless America, boy.
Are you glad to be home, you guys?
Yes.
Are you glad to be home?
Is this America?
This is the U.S. You're here at last.
Is that why everybody's speaking English, Dottie?
Right.
I think it's quite an event. It really is. When you start thinking of 51 years ago we left here, loaded to the gills with ammunition and so forth, to come back here now, it's quite an event.
It's quite something to see this ship here, the ship that you worked on, over 50 years ago. I mean, it's quite something to see something like this here today.
Good to see you. You're going to go down. There he is.
Hi, how are you?
Well, we are here because this is where this ship was built 51 years ago, and we thought it was important while we're returning from Normandy that we would stop by Portland and thank the people here for building such a magnificent ship. So the ship is in perfect operating and material condition. We've gone 12,000 miles with no repairs, and we're always ahead of schedule. So she's a fine ship. We're not going to carry cargo on this ship anymore. She's a memorial. But the holds are filled with friendship and goodwill, and our volunteer crew members are ambassadors for the United States Merchant Marine and also for America when we were in France and England. The people that made it should be very proud. She's a very straight Liberty ship. New England Shipbuilding Corporation had an excellent reputation in World War II for building good ships. We still know that good ships are built in Maine, and this is a good example 51 years later.
I worked on this boat. I rode out on it down the ways across the harbor, and we were just about 3 feet from the wharf over there, and we all thought we were going to hit the wharf. But what we didn't, it slowed down a little bit, so the old tug got a hold of it.
On this particular Jeremiah O'Brien, I worked on the keel laying and burned in some of the butts and the seams with the cutting torch. If my memory serves me, I think on that particular ship I also cut down number 1 and number 2 mast, which was a formidable job.
I was up on stage, and I went in as a stage builder. We walked planks 100 feet in the air, one plank across from one place to the other. Usually it's 2 or 3, but when I think of it, I think how crazy we really were.
I was a fire inspector for 4.5 years on the midnight shift on the shipyard, and I was aboard that and on the many a time.
Every piece of steel had a hull number, an port and a starboard, and a frame number. And as I remember it, there were 139 frames for those old girls. And 4 main mizzenmasts delivered all that steel as the ship fitters ordered it. And we put foundation in for the triple expansion engines and all the foundations for all the equipment.
One of the most difficult things that I recall, of course, being a burner, working on the exterior of the ship, cutting in shell, and seams weren't so bad, you followed one staging, but when you cut the butts in, you had to go from staging to staging, and many times it was glare ice. They didn't ask you to risk your life, but you pretty much had to in order to get the job done.
Yes, the man on one ship that was set in the motor, the engine room, was a worm digger from Cherryfield. And that's the kind of people work. Everybody worked, night and day.
All told, I think we did quite a job, and I'll never forget how marvelous all these women were that worked in the shipyard that did such a beautiful job. So I think a bunch of people coming out of the woods and getting together and sharing a lot of effort did quite a job for the war effort.
I became a welder. At the age of 16, I changed my age to 18, and I was accepted in the welding school. Graduated from there, went as a welder. And for a while, the cold weather set in anyway, one winter, and it was like 22 below zero, and they put me to work outside, and I just couldn't stand it. I cried all night. So they said, why don't you get a job inside? So then they put me on as a tacker. And from there, I graduated to a crane operator, which was an overhead crane where you had to climb the little stairs, you know, and get into this box like with push buttons, and that was a 25-tonner. Now I don't even know what a 25-tonner is today.
They give you a bead on the shell, and nobody else worked on that bead. You had to complete it. That was your responsibility. And go from scaffolding to scaffolding until you reach the top. If you didn't do a good job, then you'd get quite a few demerits.
You launch in the morning, you come back to work at night, they have another keel start laying for another ship. They did a wonderful job.
The SS Jeremiah O'Brien is a classic design Liberty ship. She's 441.5 feet long, with a beam of 57 feet and a deadweight tonnage of 10,428 tons. She could carry over 7,000 tons of cargo in her 5 holds or on her deck. On the bow of the Jeremiah, you'll find the forward gun tub with its 3-inch 50 caliber cannon. This gun was primarily used for anti-aircraft purposes, but could also be used for defense against surface threats. This was normally operated by a crew of 7 men. Although the ship's crew were merchant seamen, the armed guard manning the guns were U.S. naval personnel. There could be as few as 16 or as many as 28 naval armed guards on a Liberty ship. The ship carried a merchant crew of between 41 to 43 seamen and officers. The anchor windlass is used to bring up the anchors or to haul up the mooring line. It's controlled by a 2-cylinder steam engine. All the winches and engines on the ship are steam operated. Steam is provided by the ship's 2 main boilers at a pressure of approximately 220 psi. Here we see the booms of the number 1 hold in their cradle position, which is their normal position when at sea. They are capable of lifting 5 tons of cargo into the hold below. The hatch opening of number 1 hold is 20 by 30 feet. Here are the 2 winches that control the operation of the booms we just saw for loading and unloading cargo. Each of the ship's 5 holds has a set of these winches. The winches by number 2 hold are much larger and designed to operate 2 booms, each with a 50-ton capacity. This hold and booms were capable of storing planes and tanks. These booms were even used for lifting railroad engines onto her deck. Cargo would be placed on board ships in crates, boxes, or on pallets, because everything was hoisted into the holds by the steam winches and stored by hand. Loading or unloading could take 1 to 2 weeks. Each hold has an upper and lower section separated by what's called a tween deck, made of removable deck hatch covers. Here we're standing on the tween deck in hold number 2, which now houses a Liberty ship exhibit. At the stern is the aft gun tub with its 5-inch 38 caliber gun. This gun was the main armament for World War II destroyers and the secondary armament for battleships. The 5-inch gun had a crew of up to 11, including operators and ammo passers. Also on the aft gun deck are 2 20mm anti-aircraft guns, capable of firing 450 rounds per minute. Each was operated by as many as 3 men. This included a gunner, a loader who changed the 60-round magazines, and a pointer who kept watch for other aircraft. There are a total of 8 20mm anti-aircraft guns, 2 forward of the midship housing, 4 on the midship housing, and 2 on the aft gun deck. Below the main deck at the stern is the steering engine room. The steam-operated steering engine drives the quadrant gear, which in turn rotates the rudder post and rudder. On the stern of the ship, these round areas were used for holding smoke pots, either for hiding the ship or for marking her position. 3 decks up in the midship housing is the flying bridge, the topmost deck, where the ship is steered in warm weather or when operating in confined areas. Also located on the flying bridge are 4 20mm anti-aircraft guns, protecting the command and control centers and the living quarters of the ship. 1 deck below is the bridge deck, which contains the wheelhouse, the radio room, the chart room, and quarters for the captain, the radio operator, and 2 cadets. The wheelhouse is where most of the steering and control of the ship occurs. Here we find the wheel, the gyro compass repeater, and the magnetic compass. Also located here are the voice-powered phone and the telegraph, which communicate the wishes of the mate or captain to the engineers below. The watch on deck consists of 4 men, the mate in charge, reporting to the captain, 2 able-bodied seamen, and an ordinary seaman. The 3 seamen would rotate at 1-hour 20-minute intervals, 1 at the wheel, 1 on lookout, and 1 in a utility role. They'd work a 4-hour watch and be off 8 hours. Located in the chart room is the gyro compass. This is where the second mate plots the ship's course. Behind the chart room is the captain's office. Beyond the office is the captain's stateroom. The captain is the only one on board with private toilet and shower facilities. In the radio room, we find both the original medium frequency and high frequency radios. One deck below the bridge deck is the boat deck. Here are the quarters of the 3 deck mates, the 3 assistant engineers, and the chief engineer. This is the first mate's cabin. Similar to the captain, the chief engineer has an office adjoining his stateroom. All cabins on the boat deck have personal sinks. Outside on the boat deck, we find 4 lifeboats. We can also see 4 life rafts located fore and aft on the main deck. The life rafts were designed to withstand a drop of 15 feet and were designed so that either side could be used to support crew members. These skylights over the main engine room provide light and ventilation to the engine room below. Additional ventilation is provided by these large ventilators. Also located on the boat deck is a coal bin, which stores the coal for the galley's coal stoves, and a bin for foodstuffs like potatoes and beets. One deck below, we're back on the main deck. This deck contains the crew quarters. Normally, each crew cabin is furnished with 2 to 4 bunks, depending on cabin size. Also on the main deck is the ship's galley, where all cooking is done on a coal-fire stove. The ship has 3 messes. First, we find the crew's mess, reserved for the merchant marine crew. Adjoining the crew's mess is one reserved for the Navy Armed Guard. Between the Armed Guard mess and the crew mess, we find a small pantry for washing dishes. Moving forward, we find the officers' mess, where the captain and chief engineer would typically sit in the center. The deck officers would sit on the starboard side, and the engineering officers would sit on the port side, and the auxiliary officers would sit at a separate table on the starboard side. 2 paintings of the ship which adorn the officers' mess were donated to the Jeremiah on its trip to the Normandy observances. They were painted in Portsmouth and Chatham, England by local artists. Also hanging in this mess is a painting depicting the Revolutionary battle which won the ship's namesake the lasting respect and gratitude of his country. Jeremiah O'Brien was the nation's first naval hero, having captured the first British naval ship of the Revolution in Machias, Maine. Here on the main deck is the entrance to the engine room. The 135-ton heart of the Jeremiah is a 2,500 horsepower triple expansion steam engine. This is a 3-piston reciprocating steam engine with a 4-foot stroke. The high-pressure piston is 24.5 inches in diameter. The intermediate pressure piston is 37 inches in diameter, and the low-pressure piston is a massive 70 inches in diameter. At 76 RPM, each piston supplies about 833 horsepower. After the steam goes through the first cylinder, it goes through a slide valve which feeds it into the next cylinder, and then through another slide valve into the last cylinder. Upon exhausting from the last cylinder, the steam goes through a condenser where it is turned back to water and is pumped into a water drum for reheating in the boilers. Directly under the 3 cylinders are the 3 piston rods. Each piston rod is connected to a crank rod through a crosshead, which in turn is connected to the crankshaft. At approximately 1/2 hour intervals, the oiler lubricates specific locations on each piston rod, slide valve rod, crosshead, and crankshaft bearing. Steam is generated by 2 straight tube, cross-drum boilers capable of producing superheated steam at 450 degrees and 220 psi. Each boiler has 4 burners. The engine directly drives the propeller, which means when the engine is turning at 76 RPM, the propeller is also turning 76 RPM, and the ship is going at 11 knots, or approximately 12.5 statute miles per hour. The propeller shaft is connected to the crank via a thrust bearing. Approximately 140 feet from the engine is the 4-bladed, 18.5-foot diameter propeller. An enclosure called the shaft alley surrounds the propeller shaft from the engine room to the stern of the ship. About once an hour, the oiler will go down to the shaft alley to check the shaft bearings for heat and quantity of oil. Electricity to the ship is provided by 3 steam-driven 20,000-watt, 110-volt DC generators. Also found in the engine room are fire pumps, oil transfer pumps, and other general service pumps for pumping ballast and bilge water. There is a crew of 3 in the engine room: the engineer in charge, an oiler, and a fireman water tender, normally working 4 hours on and 8 hours off. The Jeremiah is a complex piece of machinery with over 52 miles of welding, 28,000 rivets, 3,200 tons of steel, 7.5 miles of pipe, nearly 5 miles of wiring, and covered with 25 tons of paint. Most amazing of all, built for an original cost of less than $2 million.
How about that? Two of us together, we were both on the same ship.
We flew the...
What's your name?
My name is J.P. LaCroix. Like I say, I was an armed guard gunner.
Yeah. Well, I've been looking for guys that I might have sailed with, and I have not seen a guy out of the Grant.
Can I ask you, what capacity, were you a merchant man on?
I was merchant. I was the storekeeper.
Storekeeper, yeah, well. Who knows, maybe I bought a few chocolate bars and a few cigarettes from you.
I've looked for years for somebody else that was on the Grant Wood, and he's the first guy I found.
That's something. That's an extra pleasure that I had here today, this morning. Man.
It was really a growing up period for me. Because I was 16 years old when I started sailing. So that was pretty young, but I got a quick education.
I went aboard as third mate and went as second mate after. I made a half a trip, then went second mate on the old man's ticket.
I worked in the engine room, and when they were in heavy seas, it could get very uncomfortable. Of course, the higher up you were, the more the rolling, and but we got used to it. When you're 18 or 19, you can stand about anything.
It's funny, my first trip I was seasick. Oh, God, I was so seasick. We left Norfolk and went to Norfolk, Virginia, and went to Bermuda. Oh, I was so seasick. If I could have gotten off, I would have walked ashore. Then we anchored there, and we put a lifeboat down, went sailing, killed a few days. And then we got in a canoe, went across the Central Atlantic, the Mediterranean, just as calm as it could be. And,
was this early in the war?
Yeah, this was late in 42. And so then on the engine, the smell of burning oil and that smell, God, it was so sickening. And now I finish all the sea time, I go back to the academy, I graduate, and come walking in the engine room the next time, I, boy, that smells good. Just that like perfume, you know, afterward, you're so used to it.
My first trip, headed for Texas we got down to off of the Cape Hatteras, and the Wolfpack, I guess submarines were chasing us, and so the skipper said, I can go close to shore, then go. So he did. It wasn't long before we run up on a sandbar by Diamond Shoal. Then the next one we slid off. Then the third one we fetched up.
We hauled everything there was. I've had locomotives on deck and PT boats on deck, and she was drawing. I don't know what the draft was, because at times we were loaded so much that we were aground when they finished loading, and had to get pulled off of the beach to get the sail.
Super. Easy ship to work, easy to go on, easy to steer. Quite seaworthy. Pretty good. I liked them.
But they were good old ships, though. And you went on one, you knew what you're going to go on the next one, and they all look the same. I look at them now and remember so much of the stuff.
Veterans of the Navy Armed Guard relived their roles as defenders of the Liberty ship.
I was an ensign then. I was the officer in charge of the Navy Armed Guard, the gunners crew on the ship. And we loaded to go to Murmansk in the summer of '42. We were all loaded and ready to leave when they lost 24 ships out of a 32-ship convoy running Cape of Norway. So they held us for a week. We were all loaded, ready to go. And then they took us south in convoy to the Panama Canal. Went through the canal. Then we were on our own. We went down the west coast of South America, around the Horn, then across to the South Atlantic to Cape Town, around the Cape of Good Hope, and up to the Persian Gulf, and delivered our goods to for the Russians up in the Persian Gulf in Iran and Iraq instead of Murmansk.
Well, in 1945, I went overseas from Oakland, California, to the Philippines. I was just an 18-year-old GI, and went on a troop ship version of this Liberty ship. We had 5 bunks stacked up, and the guy on the top bunk was the lucky one because they had wooden air conditioning ducts for the troop ships, and generally the one who had the upper bunk cut a hole in the air conditioning duct, and he had all this cool air coming down on him, but it ruined the temperature for everybody else.
Well, a Liberty ship is sluggish, and of course they're slow. They're about 10 knots. Some of them you get 12 knots if you had a fair tide and a full wind. So 27 days going over was not unusual at all. And it was an interesting ship. I was fascinated by them.
Probably some of the greatest nostalgia was experienced by those who actually sailed aboard the O'Brien 50 years ago.
As a member of the original crew.
And what was your position, sir?
Radio operator.
Easy does it. Up and back.
Yeah. I don't see any reason why not, especially you being a radio man. No reason why you can't go up the radio, sir.
You better. So we can say you better go up there.
That's where we used to live.
By the way, you have the afternoon watch.
I don't see any fan in here. Where's the fan? I just don't see it.
No, that was the other gentleman behind me.
That was over here.
Yep.
Over here. Haven't seen those in years. Looks like a Radio Shack.
Lieutenant Robinson, former AGO Jeremiah O'Brien, 44, 45.
Isn't that wonderful?
It's been a long-awaited meeting.
Yes, yes. And how many voyages did you ride on her?
Well, we went west.
You went west?
Yeah, we were chasing MacArthur with bombs and belly tanks and whatnot. But two of my crew members are supposed to be here. I haven't seen them yet. They were in the 11 Normandy
I see.
shuffles.
The Jeremiah O'Brien came out of Portland in 1943 on July 8th. I got on about the 10th, I would assume. I don't know the exact date. And we took a cargo in Boston, and we went to Halifax, and then we went in convoy to Europe, and it was a total of 4 round trips, which was only counted as 3.
50 years ago, I was on this ship. I served as a gunner's mate, 3rd class, and my job was in charge of the 20 millimeters. And when this ship came back from Normandy, I was the gun crew that relieved the other gun crew. We went to South America, Lima, Peru, Antofagasta, Chile. From there, we went to Houston, Texas, loaded up with 10,000 ton of 500-pound bombs and some Sherman tanks on the deck, and we headed alone for the South Pacific.
No, we were very fortunate. We saw no action. And the closest we came was a floating mop handle, which we thought was a periscope. We were very fortunate in that respect. We were the first ship into Subic Bay that didn't get blown up. The one prior to us, the Japs got her. And we were the first ones in. Of course, we'd had a nice fireworks too, because we loaded the Plimsoll with bombs. And but no, it was truly an uneventful cruise. Didn't hurt my feelings a bit.
And we, at one time, had 24 German subs in the Ark in front of us. But I got to tell you, this is the safest ship you ever rode on, because we never saw a ship sunk, burnt, hit, torpedoed, or anything else. This was fantastic.
Yeah, it was interesting coming from a medium-sized city right out of high school, and going to sea was quite different, but enjoyable sailing. I've never forgotten it. And to come back to your own ship 50 years later is quite a thrill.
Well, I first sailed the Liberty when I was 16 in 1944. And my last Liberty I sailed in 1954. And here it is 1994, and I'm making another trip. And it's quite an experience for me.
Wednesday saw a picture-perfect day to go for a cruise on Casco Bay. About 600 former shipbuilders, veterans, their families and friends spent the day cruising aboard the Jeremiah O'Brien.
Thank you for sailing Greystack Lines.
Greystack Lines.
watch your step. Going down. Thank you for riding with us today.
This ship is beyond imagination. It is exactly stepping back 50-odd years.
But it's good. I'm tickled to death to be here. I'd give my right arm to ride to Normandy with it.
I just realized I came back and I went down in the pilot house, and all my years I spent up here on the flying bridge, and it seemed funny going into the pilot house. And it seemed so cramped because my son's ship, he's captain, and his ship is 395,000 tons. And you go into his pilot house and it looks like a banquet hall. And you go into this one, it looks like a little closet. And I can remember though when I was a young kid, 21, 22 years old, how gigantic this one looked.
Oddly enough, I don't think I ever was on board a Liberty ship until today, even though, and I'm sure there were many of us that never set foot on a boat. Even while a lot of the ship fitters got on them while she was tied up at the fitting out docks and so forth, but I don't think I had ever set foot on it. My job just didn't call for it.
No, I said I was going to come up here if it killed me. I was going to make this cruise just to get the old feet planted and just know what it felt like again. It's wonderful, absolutely wonderful.
How does it feel being out here on the Jeremiah today?
Very nice. Very nice.
Does it bring a lot of memories back?
Sure does.
We went clear down the shaft tunnel, and I remember the lignum vitae barons, the stern baron was made up of lignum vitae, that's the wood, and saw the triple expansion engines, and saw the access holes. I used to go down the inner bottom and inspect the welding back when I was in the production department. Yes, I recognize a lot of the old pieces. It's been a very good day. It's been a very good day. Yeah.
The Jeremiah's homecoming, even its very existence, would not be possible without the thousands of hours spent by volunteers, both on board and back at the home port of San Francisco.
Well, I joined the ship in San Francisco, and I've been on her. I've been volunteering on her since '83 when I retired. I sailed on them, one just like it in World War II. Took a load of coal to Italy. And when I retired, so this has been my hobby. And when the ship was destined to go overseas, well, here I am.
It is a very rewarding assignment. It came as a complete surprise to me, but apparently they felt that I could handle the job, and of course my favorite answer is that I outlived the competition. When they were looking for a chief engineer, I was the only guy around who had Liberty ship experience. So they said, "You are chief." They didn't ask me if I wanted to or anything else. They'd get it ready and go.
It's been absolutely fantastic. We've been blessed with very good weather, been blessed with a fantastic crew, tremendous amount of spirit, a lot of heart, a lot of emotion. Very interesting. It has been an experience beyond belief.
For me, it's not only a wonderful experience for the whole historical aspect of it and the camaraderie here and working with these guys who are, you know, I'm 37 years old, these guys are 65, 70, and I don't believe I've ever outworked any one of them on any day. So it's just been a pleasure.
I started doing volunteer work about 4 months before the ship left, and I just started doing volunteer work, and they said the ship's leaving, and I asked if I can get an application. They said, of course. So I filled it out, and they called me up. I started doing work on the O'Brien because my father was a sea captain, and my grandfather, my great-grandfather, my great-grandfather.
I'm an ordinary seaman. It's the lowest form of marine life. But within 5 minutes, you knew where everything was. It all came back to you. Everything's the same. Even the bedspreads on the bunks are the same pattern, the same colour. The gong they sound at meal times is exactly the same as the one they had 50 years ago. Nothing's changed. Except we're all a little bit older, me and the ship. I've
talked to a lot of veterans and asked them what what the ships were like. There was a couple of veterans that were on board this ship that were original crew members, and I would always ask them, what's different? What can you remember that's different? And they say virtually nothing. Maybe the color of the inside of the ship used to be maybe green, but besides that, that's about it. Even the linen is the exact same linen. Everything I'm wearing is all World War II. The hat, the paper hat, everything is all from World War. This hat, the whole. I got a box of these. It's all World War II. It's all off a Liberty or Victory ship. This is not something you buy in the store. This is all. Everything's vintage. See, property of U.S. government. Everything.
It's more than a voyage of a lifetime. We've done things for ourselves and for other people as far as allowing them to be a part of it. They wanted to be a part of it. In every port, we've met people who sailed these ships. They have been tears in their eyes, and bringing out their old seamen's papers and bringing their families down. And it really is an amazing, it's fantastic.
Yeah, I've talked to people that have built the ship that were working in the South Portland shipyard right across from where we're standing right now. And you know, they're all just delighted to see us here, and they bring back their reminiscences. And yesterday I talked to a lady who welded on these ships, and she was pointing out how they did the welding and that type of thing. And it's really quite a moving experience.
It's been fantastic. Words can't describe it. The people I've met, the places I've been, the things I've seen have been just incredible. This has been the best time of my life.
It's nostalgia. Where the heck does a guy 19 years old, right, get to live his life again when he's 70?
On Saturday evening, a farewell celebration was held to commemorate this historic homecoming and to thank those responsible.
Isn't this great, all these cameras? All right, that's your camera, yeah. Okay, here we go. Tremendous, tremendous.
They came from the potato fields of Brewster County, from the woods and farms of northern and central Maine, from the shops and the factories, from the coast down east, men and women to respond to the call.
It is, I think, rightfully believed that World War II would not have been won without the American Merchant Marine, and that it, of course, could not have done its job without the Liberty ship.
It was once said that if it was not for the Merchant Marine and the U.S. Navy Armed Guard, the Allies would have lost the war. It goes back to saying, united we stand and divided we fall.
I can say that thousands of our people are died, and help of American and British, and I can say mostly by ships of liberty. Thank you very much for your help during the war.
This is a very special evening, as we all know. It was the reuniting of Maine with a Liberty ship that they built 51 years ago. I'm sure nobody in that launching party on June 19th, 1943, in their wildest dreams ever thought that this ship would be a national memorial and would come back here at this year. So it's our pleasure to be here, and thank you very, very much from all of us on the Jeremiah O'Brien, and please come to San Francisco and see us. Thank you.
The most important memory that I have is of the intense interest shown in England and France for bringing the ship over there after 50 years since the landings at Normandy. England and France owed their very existence to the Liberty ships bringing the supplies over, not only military supplies, but the necessities of life. And they are absolutely pathetically grateful to the Americans for the Liberty ship.
Our crew, every place we went, was invited to march in the parade. And being a merchant crew, they just wear Jeremiah shirts and a Jeremiah cap. And we'd have precision, big military bands would get a polite applause. This little Jeremiah crew came along with their beards and 70 years old, 75 years old. My God, the people would just clap their hands raw. It was absolutely amazing.
The people were wonderful. I had never really been associated too much with World War II, having been very young at the time. I remember my parents talking about it, but it didn't really mean too much to me. But this really, this trip really brought home what the sacrifices meant and what the people, how much the people appreciated, especially in England. I wasn't in France, but in England, every port, they just couldn't be nice enough to us or thank us enough for 1944. I mean, they just kept saying if it wasn't for the Yanks, you know, they would have been ruled by the Germans by now, and they were really thankful for our presence.
So we left there feeling that the mission had been far more than we anticipated. We felt that we did a little job to bring England, France, and the United States back together as allies. We felt we had helped the education of the young people that participated in this. And we showed the world that America, particularly Portland, built the finest ships. As whoever would have dreamed when this ship was launched over there just an eighth of a mile away, 1943, that she would be back here now looking as beautiful as she did the day she was launched. It's a tribute to the people that designed these fine Liberty ships, people that built these Liberty ships, people in South Portland. It's a tribute to our merchant marine of World War II that was able to sail the ship in and out of harm's way. It was a tribute to our reserve fleet that kept it preserved for 33 years in wonderful condition. And finally, it's a tribute to these old-timers today that can get the ship and keep it going out of love.
Well, it's great to be on board, I tell you. My heart will always be with the Liberty ships. And when you think of all the war material that we turned out would have been useless to us if we hadn't had that bridge of ships to take it all over to.
We had 2,751 Liberty ships. That certainly helped win the war. Because no matter what you needed to transport, armament, guns, ammunition, troops, food, whatever, we were there and we carried the load.
I figured we was a big part of helping the war effort, delivering the oil for the airplanes and lubricating oil, everything like that. We carried all kinds of stuff, but it was quite an experience, I tell you. And it's good to come back to see the old ships again.
What does it feel like being back here after 50 years?
Oh, you don't know how it feels. It feels great.
The Jeremiah O'Brien today serves not only as a memorial to a very heroic time in our history, but reminds us of the lessons and values that must be passed on from generation to generation.
Right today, this ship is a magnificent training ship for young people who want to go into the engineering field, because it's pretty obvious that all of the moving parts are visible. There's nothing hidden.
And some of the young people that didn't even know about this kind of work today can see the ship and see what was done with a lot of effort from some of the old timers.
I think that we're such a throwaway society in America that it's important for us to preserve what we have, and this is the only ship of its kind left. Whether it'll always be seaworthy or not is really, to me, not that important, quite important probably to other people. But the fact that we've preserved it in the history, I think it's important for young people to understand the sacrifices made in the Second World War for their freedom.
I would like to turn it over to a younger person because when my generation goes, we want to have people who can take over the running of the ship without any gap, without any lost motion.
When I get back, I have every intention to continue working on the Jeremiah O'Brien, and I'm going to try to bring some of my other younger friends to come work on the ship, to share the experience.
I'm going to take away a philosophy that has been lost, a philosophy of a can-do group of people. I get a little emotional thinking about this now. So during the war, everybody rolled up their sleeves and went to work and built these ships and fought the war. The whole country was together. I see that spirit aboard this ship. I don't see it in the rest of our country. It's more of a give and can-do philosophy. That's what I take away. People who, the salt, the real salt of the American people, the pride, the ingenuity, the capabilities. I don't see any whining and crying. I mean, these people in their 70s, a lot of them, and they're out to sea again, doing work that young men, 18, 19 years old, used to do. And that's a generation. That message should try to get back out to the people because we need more of that.
As a merchant seaman, it's definitely a living memorial to me. It's a very special place in all seamen's hearts. All ships are, and this one in particular, where it's kind of the old grand dame, queen of the fleet. It's the memories. It shows where we came from. It shows what trials and tribulations these men went through.
When I stood here at Fort Williams Park on Saturday morning, August 6th, and I saw that vessel enter the port, all I could see was the beauty of the lines of the vessel and the beauty of the people who gave their lives, many of them, to build them and to sail them. Then who could ask for more? That ship, in my opinion, is as beautiful as any vessel that ever sailed the waters.
Just think, this ship has come home.